Farm country, the dead of winter. A road that leaves the last streetlight around mile 9 and never looks back. At the edge of everything, one gas station, two pumps, a coffee machine that hisses like it has opinions, a girl behind the counter, 19 years old, $14 to her name, working the shift nobody else wants. An old man comes in every night, same time, same coffee. Tonight he leaves without his wallet. She picks it up, opens it, goes completely still. $900 in cash she could keep. Nobody would ever know. But it isn't the money that stops her breathing. It's the photograph inside, the one she's been carrying the other half of her entire life. The tin was an old Altoids tin. Spearmint, the original kind. The lid had a small dent on one corner where Ren had dropped it on a parking garage floor 6 months ago and watched it skitter under a stranger's tire. She had crawled after it on her hands and knees, on a parking garage floor, at 11 at night, in the rain, because it had $14 in it. And $14 was what stood between her and nothing. She kept the tin under the counter at the gas station. Third shelf, behind the box of receipt paper and the broken stapler nobody had thrown away yet because the broken stapler was at least familiar and familiar, had value out here at the edge of everything. The tin lived there all night, every night. She knew exactly where it was without looking, which was maybe the only thing in her life she could say that about. Ren Calder was 19 years old. She weighed 112 pounds with her work boots on. She had dark eyes that people sometimes called serious and sometimes called sad, depending on how well they knew her. And she worked the overnight shift at a gas station on Route 9 in a part of the county where the streetlights gave up about a mile outside of town and the dark farm country just took over. Two pumps, a wall of energy drinks, a coffee machine that hissed like it had opinions, and a counter where Ren stood for 8 hours under fluorescent lights that buzzed. All night, every night. The job paid just enough to be insulting, but it came with one thing she needed more than money right now: a roof. A locked door between her and the cold from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. She had aged out of the foster care system the spring she turned 18. And here is the part nobody sits you down and explains beforehand. Here is the part they really should put on a sign somewhere. You age out on a specific date. One day there is a bed and a caseworker and a placement file with your name on it. And then there is a Tuesday, and on the Tuesday the bed is gone, and the caseworker has 12 other kids, and what you have is a garbage bag, a handshake, and a sidewalk that goes in 2 directions, and you have to pick one. Ren had picked this one. She wasn't sure yet if it was the right direction, but she was still standing. She still had the tin, and the job came with a stockroom with a concrete floor and a camp pad she had found folded behind a stack of cardboard, and a manager who sometimes looked the other way between 2 and 5 in the morning. She washed her hair in the utility sink. She ate whatever was about to expire and would otherwise go in the trash. She did not feel sorry for herself about any of this, because feeling sorry for yourself costs energy, and energy was the one currency she actually could not afford to waste. The diner next door was called Vera's. 6 stools, a griddle, a coffee pot that Ren had privately decided was the best coffee in the county, which she would never say out loud because she was technically employed to sell the gas station's version. Vera Holt had owned the place for 22 years. She was 63 and looked 55 and moved like 50-something, which was honestly just good genetics and an unwillingness to slow down. She wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain and kept her hair pinned up with whatever was nearest when she needed both hands, which was most of the time. Pencils, pens, once memorably a plastic fork. Ren had met her the second week of the job. It had been a slow night, 3 in the morning. Ren had been standing at the window of the gas station eating the last of a bag of pretzels and watching a moth throw itself at the pump light with real conviction. And then a face had appeared in the window on the other side of the glass. Very close. Too close. Looking at her. Ren had gone completely still. The face had knocked, then made a gesture like eating. And because Ren was 19 and alone and had not yet developed the specific skill of saying no to food, when food was being offered, she had gone next door. Vera had set a plate in front of her without asking. Scrambled eggs, toast, a pile of home fries that Ren had wanted so badly her jaw actually hurt. I can't take this, Ren had said. You're not taking it, I'm giving it. That's the same thing. Different verb, Vera had said. These are end-of-night eggs. They go in the trash or they go in you. You want me to feed the trash? Ren had looked at the eggs. Then she had looked at the trash. She had eaten the eggs, and that was how it started. On her breaks, Ren would slip next door, and Vera would slide something in front of her that Ren had not ordered and could not pay for, and they would sit on either side of the counter and talk. Or not talk. Some nights they just existed in the same warm space while the dark pressed against the windows, and that was enough. It was more than enough, actually. It was more than Ren had had and longer than she wanted to count. One night, about 3 months into the job, Ren had told Vera about the tin, about the $14, about the math that kept coming out wrong no matter how many times she ran it. Vera had taken her reading glasses off and let them drop on the chain. You sleeping in that stockroom? Just until I get ahead. Vera had not said anything unkind. She had not said anything sharp. She had just looked at Ren for a moment the way you look at something you recognize from a long time ago. And then she had said the thing. Listen to me. There are two kinds of poor in this world, honey. Broke and cheap. Broke is a money problem. Money comes and goes. That's just weather. But cheap. Cheap is a character problem, and the only kind of poor you cannot ever climb out of. Ren had turned her coffee cup on the counter. I won't be cheap. I know you won't. That's why I feed you. Vera had put her glasses back on. Finish your potatoes before they get cold. Ren had finished her potatoes, and she had carried that distinction with her like a compass ever since. Broke versus cheap. Two different things. The first one could be fixed by circumstance. The second one you had to choose your way into. She had made the choice. She was still making it. Every shift, every night. She had a photograph. One photograph. It lived in a sandwich bag inside the inner pocket of her coat. The plastic of the bag had gone soft from handling over years, and the photograph itself had gone soft too. The paper worn thin at the corners, the surface a little blurred in the places she had touched it most. It showed a porch, a farmhouse porch with weathered boards, a big shaggy dog sitting patient as furniture at the edge of the frame, and a little girl, maybe 6 years old, crouching beside the dog with one hand buried deep in the fur at his neck. There was a man standing beside the little girl, or there had been. You could see his arm, the corner of his shoulder, the edge of something plaid, but where his face should have been there was a pale blur, soft, worn away by years of a thumb going over that spot, over and over and over until there was nothing left to see. Her mother had done that. Ren had worked it out when she was about 8 years old, the way the blur was distributed, the pattern of it. The wear was from the inside out, spreading from the center of where the man's face would have been, and the photograph was soft in exactly the shape a thumb would make when you held a picture in both hands and rubbed. Her mother had rubbed his face away, deliberately, slowly, probably without even realizing she was doing it the way you worry a loose thread until the seam gives. On the back of the photograph in pencil, so faint it was almost invisible, was a single word. Home. The handwriting was not her mother's childhood handwriting. Ren had seen that on other things, old school papers, a birthday card tucked in a library book. The handwriting on the photograph was an adult woman's handwriting. Controlled, a little tired, written much later than the photograph itself. Her mother had held this picture for years, worn away the face of someone in it, and then one day written a single word on the back. Home. And then she had given it to Ren, just before she died. Ren was 12. The hospital room was small, and the light was wrong, and her mother's hand was very light in hers, barely there at all. and she had pressed the photograph into Wren's hand and said something that Wren had never fully understood. "Find your way home, baby." And then her mother was gone. And Wren had spent the next 7 years in a system that moved her 7 times and called it care holding, a photograph of a porch she couldn't name with a dog she didn't know, and a man with no face. She used to lie awake and wonder whose thumb had done that, whose hand had gone over and over that face until it was gone. She was pretty sure it was her mother's, but she could never decide if that meant her mother was trying to forget him, or if she just couldn't help touching the place he used to be. Silas Dunbar started coming in sometime in early October, always around 2 in the morning, always alone. He drove a truck the color of old copper, a 1994 F-150 that looked like it had survived several things and had opinions about all of them. He parked crooked every single time, not dangerously crooked, just enough crooked that it was clearly not a parking problem but a parking preference. The man had simply decided that perpendicular to the lines was a suggestion. He came in walking careful and slow, joints that had been through decades of outdoor work, heavy boots, a canvas coat the color of dried leaves, always the same coat, always the same slow nod when he came through the door, which was less a greeting than an acknowledgement that they were both real. He bought one black coffee, nothing else. No snacks, no gas, no lottery scratchers. One black coffee, exact change counted from a worn leather wallet, a nod that was almost a bow at the end of the transaction. And then he would find a spot near the window with his cup and stand there looking at the pumps in the road and whatever was beyond the road in the dark. He did not want to talk. Wren respected that immediately and completely. She had learned quickly that people who came through a gas station at 2 in the morning fell into categories. There were the talkers who wanted to tell her their entire lives and expected her to make the right sounds while she rang them up. There were the sleepwalkers who were just moving from one point to another and barely registered that she was a human person behind the register. And then there were the ones like the old man with the copper truck, the ones who wanted the light, just the warmth, just the company of another person being awake in the dark at the same time they were. She understood that category very personally. By his third visit, she had his coffee ready before he reached the counter. He noticed. The first time it happened, his eyes came up from the cup and found her face and stayed there a beat longer than expected. Just one beat, then dropped back to the coffee. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, the rough of a voice that did not get used enough. "Cold one tonight," Wren said. "They're all cold now," the old man said, and went to his window. That was the longest conversation they had for 3 weeks. She asked him his name eventually, not from nosiness. She asked because she had developed the habit of learning the names of the regulars. It felt rude not to. "Silas," he said. "Wren." He nodded like that was a name that made sense to him somehow. Then he went back to his window. Once she caught him watching her in the round security mirror bolted up in the corner. The kind of mirror that makes the whole room look like the inside of a fishbowl. Their eyes met in the curved glass, and he looked away so fast that Wren felt bad. Like she had caught him at something private. Like she had walked in on a room he had not meant to leave the door open to. She decided he was just lonely. There were a lot of lonely old men in this county. Men whose wives had died and whose children had moved to cities with better weather and who drove to gas stations at 2 in the morning because the house was too quiet and the ceiling was too familiar, and a cup of bad coffee with a stranger was still better than a cup of good coffee alone. She figured he was one more of those. She was wrong, but she had no way to know that yet. He came in on a Wednesday in November with something in his jacket pocket. She could tell because he kept touching it. Just brief pats. The way you check your phone in a situation where you're not supposed to check your phone. The way you make sure a thing is still there when a thing feels important enough that you need to keep confirming it. He bought his coffee, he counted out his coins, he nodded, and then instead of going to the window, he stood at the counter. "Can I show you something?" He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a cassette tape. The old kind. Compact cassette type 190 minutes. The plastic case was cloudy with age, Cloudy in the way that means it had been handled thousands of times in thousands of pockets, and the label on the side was handwritten in blue ballpoint pen, the ink still dark, the letters careful and deliberate. Della. Live. Age 22. That was all it said. Wren looked at the tape, then at Silas. He was watching her with something careful in his face, something that was not quite a question, something closer to waiting to see if she would recognize a word in a language she didn't know she spoke. "Is there a record store?" he said. "Around here, somewhere that still fixes old equipment." She thought about it. "There's a place on Merchant Street," she said. "Hadley's. The man there fixes vintage audio stuff sometimes. Not sure he takes walk-ins." Silas turned the tape over in his hands. "The machine that plays this one," he said. "It broke a while back. He stopped, let out a breath through his nose, wanted to see if anyone could fix it. "What's on it?" A long pause. "Music," he said finally. "Someone I knew. Playing." He put the tape back in his pocket, patted it once, then picked up his coffee and went to the window. Wren stood at the counter. Della. She didn't know why that name did what it did. She didn't know why it landed somewhere behind her sternum, like a stone dropped in still water, finding a depth she didn't know was there. She had never heard that name before. There was no reason it should mean anything to her. She went back to facing the register, but she kept hearing it in her head, that quiet, careful handwriting. Della. Live. Age 22. The name of someone a lonely old man could not stop patting his pocket to confirm. She put it aside. She was good at putting things aside. You had to be. When you grew up in the system, you got very efficient at storing things in compartments and sealing the compartments and going back to the task in front of you. It was how you survived. You did not have the luxury of sitting with things. You processed quickly or you went under. 3 customers came and went. The night got colder. At 2:45, Silas put his cup down and left. And Wren, who had been so careful not to look, watched him in the round mirror as he walked back to the copper truck and sat in it for a long time before he started the engine. The coldest night of the year came on a Thursday. The thermometer screwed to the window frame outside read 8 degrees. 8. The wind came off the empty fields in gusts that found every gap in the building, and several gaps she was fairly certain had not existed before tonight. She wore her coat behind the counter and her fingerless gloves, and still could not feel her feet. The road was dead, not one car for almost 2 hours. She was starting to think nobody would come at all. And then the copper truck pulled in, crooked as always. Silas came walking across the lot with his collar turned up so high it met the brim of his cap. He looked smaller in the cold, or maybe just more honest about it, like the temperature was extracting a truth from him that warmer nights allowed him to conceal. His coffee was already poured. He wrapped both hands around the cup the way you hold the only warm thing in the world when the world has decided to be entirely cold. "You shouldn't be out in this," Wren said. She meant it. He almost smiled. "Can't sleep. Never could. Coffee's better than staring at the ceiling." "I hear that." He counted out his coins, $1.65 exact, every single time. He dropped them in her hand and then he reached into his pocket. The tape. He put it on the counter, not like he meant to, not with intention. Just set it down the way you set things down when your hands are full and your mind is somewhere else and your body makes small decisions without consulting you. "You can get this to the man on Merchant Street." He said it like he had already thought it through, like it had taken him a while to decide to say it, like asking a favor was something he did not do easily. Wren looked at the tape, then at him. "I can try." He nodded. "Whatever it costs." He started to pick it back up. She stopped him without touching his hand. She just said, "Leave it. I'll take care of it." He looked at her for that one beat too long again, like he was checking something, like he had a photograph somewhere and he was holding it up against her face to see if it matched. She did not look away. He dropped his eyes first, nodded, went to his window. Wren picked up the tape and read the label again. Della, live, age 22. She set it carefully under the counter, next to the receipt paper, next to the broken stapler, next to the Altoids tin with $14 in it. She watched him at the window for a while. He stood there for almost 20 minutes, just looking at the pumps and the dark road and whatever was out there in the cold that she couldn't see. And then he finished his coffee, set the cup down with a care that suggested the cup meant something, and turned to leave. He got to the door, and then he stopped. His hand went to his back pocket. He turned back to the counter. He set his wallet down to check something in his coat, the tape, she thought, and then he thought he had found it, and he nodded to himself, and he turned up his collar, and he walked out into the cold and got in the truck, and the headlights swept across the lot, and he was gone. The road was empty, 8 below zero, and his taillights were already nothing. Wren stood at the counter, and then she looked down. The wallet was still sitting there. Dark brown leather, worn soft at the fold, the stitching gone dark, the edges rubbed into a kind of shine that only comes from years of being in and out of the same pocket. It had been sitting on the counter the whole time. He had set it down to check something else and walked out without picking it back up. She picked it up. It was thick. Wren was not a person who had seen a lot of thick wallets. She had seen thin wallets. She had seen empty wallets. She had at one point in her life carried a wallet that contained a library card, a bus pass, and a photograph, because that was the entire inventory of things she owned that were card-shaped. So when she opened this one and saw the bills, she went still. Hundreds. Folded once. Stacked with the care of someone who had grown up in a time when money was handled, not tapped on a phone. She counted them without deciding, to just her fingers moving on their own, and then she stopped because the number had already passed everything she had in the world and everything she would earn before spring. She stood under the buzzing lights and looked at the money. It was a warm motel. It was bus fare to somewhere with a better chance. It was a deposit on an actual room with an actual door and an actual lock that was hers. It was groceries. It was the difference between the camp pad on the stockroom floor and a real mattress. It was February and March and maybe April. Nobody had seen. No camera over the counter. Just the round mirror in the corner that showed her own face hollow in the cheeks, tired under the eyes, looking back at her with whatever expression you make when you are holding someone else's rent money in your hands. Silas did not know her last name. He did not know one true thing about her past. If she kept it, he would simply think he had dropped the wallet somewhere on the road, the truck, the parking lot. He would go back over his steps in the morning. He would not find it. He would grieve the loss the way you grieve any loss when you are 73 and the losses have been adding up quietly for years. And that would be the end of it. She looked at the money for a long time. And then she heard Vera's voice. Not imagined, not a figure of speech. She actually heard it, the specific warm rasp of it, like Vera was standing 2 feet away with her glasses on the chain and her forearms on the counter. The only kind of poor you cannot ever climb out of. Wren folded the bills back exactly as they had been. There was no version of herself that took an old man's money in the cold. She would find his address. She would drive out there on her next morning off and hand it back to him, and that would be that. Clean, simple. She would not let it be complicated. She dug through the wallet for his license. It was there behind a card slot. Silas Dunbar. The address on the license was a rural route out on Crestline Road, past the edge of everything she had learned. She memorized it the same methodical way she had learned which shelters had available beds and which churches served hot food on Thursdays. Same mechanism, different data. And then she found something else. Behind the license, behind another slot, something stiffer, the size of a playing card. She worked it loose with 2 fingers, careful, and turned it over into the buzzing light. A photograph, a farmhouse porch, a big shaggy dog, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, crouching with one hand buried in the dog's fur at the neck, a man standing beside her. His face, clear, present. A man in his early 30s looking straight into the camera with the stillness of someone who is memorizing the moment. Strong jaw, weather-worn, dark eyes with a slight squint, That might have been the sun, or might have just been how he looked when he felt something deeply. Wren did not breathe. Her hand went to the inside pocket of her coat, did not consult her brain about this, just went. Her fingers found the sandwich bag, and she pulled it out, and she put it on the counter next to Silas's photograph without letting herself think about what she was doing. She looked at both photographs. The same porch, the same dog, same angle, same sun, same patient posture, the same little girl, the same hand, the same broken board running diagonally across the bottom right corner of the frame, a crack that went from the edge all the way to the center, a crack that does not happen twice in the same way on any porch in the world. On her photograph, the man had no face. On his photograph, the man's face was worn smooth from decades of a pocket. But you could still see the shape of it, the jaw, the eyes, the slight squint. He was looking straight at the camera, straight up out of the photograph, straight at Wren, in the buzzing light, at 2:50 in the morning, in a gas station at the edge of town. She stood there for a long time, longer than she knew. The fluorescent light buzzed. The coffee machine hissed at nothing, and Wren stood with both photographs on the counter in front of her, and her heart doing something she did not have a word for. Not pounding, not racing, something more like a fist on a door that has been locked a long time. Knocking, steady, certain. She turned Silas's photograph over. The back was covered in the same faded pencil as her own, the same hand. She was almost certain it was the same hand. His said more than hers. Hers said one word. His said the front porch. April. Her and her father. Below that, half worn away, but still readable, a line she had to tilt toward the light to make out. She's going to be something, this girl. Wren put the photograph down. She put her hand flat on the counter. The little girl crouching with her hand in the dog's fur. The man with the clear eyes looking straight at the camera. The man whose face Wren had been carrying as an absence her whole life. Just a pale blur, the shape of where a person used to be. She was 4 when that photograph was taken. She knew this because she could still feel the dog's fur under her hand if she went looking for it. In the deep storage of the body, the kind of memory that lives in muscle, not in mind. The roughness of it, the warmth underneath. The way the dog had smelled like outside and safety, and something that had no better name than just dog. She did not remember the man. She did not remember his face, but she remembered being on that porch. She had always thought she was remembering something imaginary, a composite of porches from different foster placements assembled by a child who needed a home, feeling badly enough that she had invented one. She had thought the porch in the photograph was a coincidence of her own wishes, a place that felt like home because home was what she wanted. But the broken board was real. The broken board did not happen twice. And the man in Silas's photograph was looking at her with the eyes of someone who already knew her. Wren folded both photographs, put them together in the sandwich bag, put the bag back in her coat pocket with shaking hands that she made herself steady before she let them do anything else. Then she picked up the wallet and looked at it. Silas Dunbar, Crestline Road. She set the wallet carefully under the counter, next to the tape, next to the receipt paper, next to the broken stapler, next to the tin that held the $14 that now felt somehow like a completely different number than it had an hour ago. She was not going to figure this out tonight. She was not going to figure this out under these lights with these shaking hands and this buzzing and the cold pressing against the window and the road outside completely empty. She was going to stand at this register until 6 in the morning. She was going to face the next 3 hours with the same stubbornness she had used to face every previous night. One transaction at a time, one cup of bad coffee at a time, one car at a time, appearing out of the dark and then disappearing back into it. She was not going to spiral. She was not going to assume. She was going to drive out to Crestline Road on her next morning off and return the man's wallet. And that was the only decision she was allowed to make right now. Everything else could wait. She breathed out through her nose. The coffee machine hissed. She breathed in. She did not sleep that day. She lay on the camp pad in the stockroom with both photographs pressed face to face inside the sandwich bag and listened to the buildings settle around her and told herself all the reasons she was wrong. Old porches all look alike. Old dogs look alike. The broken board could be a coincidence. She built every argument she could and knocked each one down because the board ran corner to corner with a diagonal crack that split exactly at the third plank from the right side, and there was a knot in the second plank that looked like a small closed eye, and she had traced both of those details with her finger 100 times over the years, and she would have recognized them on the dark side of the moon. You do not get the same broken board twice. She memorized the address from the license. Silas Dunbar, Crestline Road, rural route, past the edge of everything. She said it to herself in the dark, over and over, the way she used to memorize emergency numbers when she was small, just in case, just so there was always something she knew by heart. She had a grandfather, and she was almost certain he was dying, and he had been buying coffee from her for 2 months and leaving the tape of her mother's voice in his jacket pocket every single time he came in, just in case he got up the nerve to say something, and he never had. She knew this because she had looked up Dunbar Farm online at 6:15 in the morning on the gas station's barely functional work computer, and she had found a 43-second clip on a local news website from 4 years ago. A segment about small farms in the county. Silas Dunbar, 73, talking about apple trees. He looked like the man in the photograph, and also like what happens to a man after 40 years of weather and loss and still getting up in the morning anyway. The segment mentioned he had one employee on the property and that the farm had been in the family since his father's time and that he intended to keep it that way. Then she had found a brief item in the county paper archives from 8 years ago. Silas Dunbar requesting assistance from any individuals with knowledge of the whereabouts of his daughter Della Calder, born to Silas Dunbar and the late Miriam Dunbar. Last known contact approximately 20 years prior. Any information welcomed. There was a phone number. Wren stared at that item for a long time. Della Calder. Her mother's name had been Della Calder. She had thought it was just a name, one of those names that means nothing. That could belong to anyone. And it did belong to Silas Dunbar's daughter, who had left home at 18, who had never come back, who had worn away a man's face from a photograph over years and years of handling it, and still written one word on the back. Home. Wren turned the computer off. She stood in the empty gas station in the early morning light. She put her hand in her coat pocket. She felt the sandwich bag gone soft from years of handling. She did not cry. She thought about crying, but it seemed too small a container for what this was. Like trying to put a weather system in a jar. She needed to be sure. She needed proof that nobody could argue with. She needed to walk up to that farmhouse on Crestline Road with something in her hands that was more than a torn photograph, and a matching broken board, and a mother's name, and her own face in the mirror every morning. So she was going to return the wallet first. Clean, simple, no claims, no speeches, just a girl who worked nights driving out to return what wasn't hers. And then she would see. She would get one look at his face up close, in daylight, and she would know. She already knew. But she would make herself be sure. She borrowed Vera's car on her first morning off. She asked without explaining. She just said a customer left his wallet. There's cash in it. I want to return it. Vera had looked at her over the reading glasses for a long second. Then a small, private smile had moved across her face. The kind of smile that has history in it. Of course you are, Vera said. She handed over the keys. Bring it back with gas in it. Wren drove out of town as the morning light was doing its slow work on the sky. The street lights thinned and then gave up. The fields opened flat in both directions. Then the land started to roll. The rolls grew orchards, apple trees in long rows, black and bare. With the last of winter, their branches pruned into the same patient shapes they had held for decades. She slowed at a leaning mailbox with numbers painted by hand. She turned in. A long driveway, more bare trees on both sides, and at the end of it, A white farmhouse that needed paint, a barn that needed more than paint, and a porch. The porch. She knew the boards before she even got out of the car. She sat with her hands on the wheel and looked at the porch and felt the exact sensation of a very old door opening from the inside. And then a dog came around the corner of the house. Old, big, gray all the way from the muzzle to the chest now, moving stiff in the hips. She tensed the way you learn to tense around strange dogs when you have spent your life in places where not all dogs were friendly. The dog walked straight to the car. No barking, no warning, just straight to the door. She opened it, slowly, and the dog pushed his whole gray head into her lap and leaned. His full weight, settling. The way something settles when it finally reaches the thing it has been walking toward. "Hey," she said. It came out barely a sound. "Hey. Hi. Hey." The dog breathed out from somewhere deep in his chest and pressed harder. She sat in the borrowed car with her hands in the fur of a very old dog and looked up at the porch of a house she had been carrying in a sandwich bag for 7 years. And she thought, okay, she had found it. It had been out here the whole time, waiting. "Patch," a woman's voice from the porch, sharp. The dog did not move. Wren looked up. A woman in an apron stood on the steps, drying her hands on a dish towel, watching the borrowed car with the careful eyes that people in quiet places give to things they don't recognize. "Patch." The woman said it again. The dog moved his head exactly enough to look back at the woman, then looked at Wren, then settled again. "He doesn't do that," the woman said. "Not with strangers. He bites the utility reader," she added, like this was relevant context. "I'm looking for Silas Dunbar," Wren said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. She got out of the car. The dog stayed at her side. He left his wallet at the gas station. She held it up. "Route 9. I work nights. I wanted to bring it back." The woman's face moved through surprise and then through something more complicated. And before she could answer, the screen door banged. And there he was, on the porch, a flannel robe over his clothes, one hand on the door frame, one hand on a cane she had not seen him use at the gas station. He looked smaller in the daylight, grayer. The skin under his eyes had gone thin. The short walk from his chair had cost him something. For a moment, he blinked at the girl in the yard like you blink at something that exists outside the context where you have placed it. Like seeing your teacher in a grocery store when you are 9. The brain says, "I know this person," but the brain cannot immediately solve for why. And then it solved. "You're the girl with the coffee," he said. His voice had that same roughness, but softer than usual, uncertain, like he was not entirely sure she was real. "I work the night shift. You left this." She held out the wallet. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the dog leaning on her leg, and his eyes went bright at the rims. "You drove all the way out here," he said. His voice cracked on the last word just slightly, just enough to show the depth of what was under it. "To bring me my wallet." "Yes, sir. There's near $1,000 in that wallet, child." "I know, I counted it twice. It kept me up." He laughed. A startled, rusty sound, like a laugh that had been in storage and was surprised to be needed. Then he coughed, and Wren stood in the cold with the dog leaning on her leg and the wallet extended and her heart doing that thing again, that knocking thing, and she looked at the man on the porch. She looked at his jaw, his eyes, the set of his face when he was feeling something he was trying not to show. She knew that face. She had been looking at it in the mirror her whole life. The room above the kitchen had a slanted ceiling and a window that looked out over the orchard, and a real bed, an actual mattress, springs underneath and everything. Wren sat on the edge of it that first night and pressed her palms flat against the surface and felt the give of it. Just sat there feeling the give, like she needed to confirm it was real before she trusted it enough to lie down. She had said yes. She had not meant to say yes so fast. Silas had made the offer over coffee at the kitchen table that same morning. She had returned the wallet in a voice that was gruff and a little embarrassed, and clearly had been rehearsed on the drive over from whatever chair he had been sitting in when the idea occurred to him. The farm needed work. More work than one man with a cane could manage. The cider press was broken. The barn was a disgrace. There were ladders he could no longer climb without it being a problem for everyone. The room above the kitchen, he said, nobody sleeping in it, pays better than overnight coffee. Everett had been standing by the door when Silas made the offer, arms crossed, ledger book under his elbow, face arranged into the expression of a man who has very strong feelings about something and has decided to wait and see before saying them out loud. He did not say them out loud. He just watched. Wren had looked at Silas, then at the window, then at Patch, who was sitting on her foot. She had said, "When do you need an answer?" And Silas had said, "You're sitting at my kitchen table." I'd say now. So, yes. She had gone back to the gas station and worked her last 3 shifts and said goodbye to the stockroom floor and the camp pad and the broken stapler. She moved the Altoids tin into her coat pocket. She borrowed Vera's car one more time. She drove back out to Crestline Road on a Thursday afternoon when the sky was the white of late February and the bare orchard looked like something drawn in charcoal. All lines, no softness. Dottie helped her carry her bag upstairs without being asked. Wren had one bag, a canvas duffel. That was the whole inventory of Wren Calder's worldly possessions. The duffel, the coat on her back, the Altoids tin, and the sandwich bag in the inner pocket. Dottie did not comment on the bag. She just carried it up the narrow back stairs and set it on the bedroom floor and pointed out the radiator and explained that it made a sound at 3 in the morning like a large person clearing their throat, but it was not alarming. Wren said she would be fine. Dottie looked at her. The way Dottie looked at things Wren was learning was comprehensive. Like a complete assessment was happening behind the surface of the expression. Like she was reading a document, and you were not the document, you were just the person standing on top of it. "You look like her," Dottie said. And then she went downstairs. The work started the next morning, 6 in the morning, which after 2 years of working until 6 felt almost indulgent. Silas was already at the kitchen table when she came down. Coffee made, 2 cups. He pushed one toward her without looking up from whatever he was reading. She sat, she drank. Outside the window, the orchard sat in the early light, all those bare, patient shapes, and the sun was just starting to do something pink along the ridge. The trees, Silas said, still not looking up. "We start with the trees." "Okay, I'll tell you what to do." He said it plainly without apology. "You'll do the things I can't get up a ladder to do anymore. Pruning the high water sprouts, checking the top grafts. I'll be on the ground." He finally looked up. "You afraid of heights? No." "Good." He went back to reading. "Drink your coffee." She drank her coffee. The first week she learned the orchard. Not just the physical layout of it, though she learned that too, the rows and the varieties, in which trees were older than the barn, in which ones Silas's father had planted, in which ones Silas himself had put in during years that meant something to him. But the other things, the alive things. Which tree was the early bloomer? Which one held its fruit too long in a warm fall? Which gnarled, twisted, barely standing thing in the back corner of the north plot still produced? Silas said with a kind of private satisfaction. The sweetest apples on the whole place. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that old and broken down means finished," he said one morning, standing under that tree with his cane and his breath making small clouds in the cold air. He was looking up at the branches. Most of the time, the things that look almost done are just waiting on the right season. Wren on the ladder above him did not say anything, because she thought if she opened her mouth right, then something else might come out. Something she was not ready to say. Something about the photograph and her mother and the word on the back, and the fact that she was 19 years old and had been waiting her whole life to find out she had started somewhere before she arrived in a system that processed her like paperwork. She pruned the water sprout instead, clean cut, angle away from the bud, the way Silas had shown her. He nodded when she held it up. Like that, he said, "You learn fast." Everett was everywhere and never in the same room as Wren if he could help it. He managed this with the practiced skill of a person who had thought it through. If Wren was in the barn, Everett was in the house. If Wren was in the house, Everett was in the machine shed. If they ended up in the same room by accident, he found something to do on the other side of it and did it very thoroughly until one of them had a reason to leave. He was 46, broad across the shoulders with the kind of hands that knew machinery, the knuckles slightly swollen in the way that happens when you have been using your hands hard for 30 years. He kept the books. He maintained the equipment. He drove Silas to the cardiologist in the county seat every third Thursday. He did not trust Wren. He had not said so. He did not need to. She watched him the same way she had always watched the adults in her placements. Not with fear, just with careful attention, the kind of attention that is actually a survival skill dressed up as curiosity. You learn to read rooms when rooms are all you have. You learn to read people when people have all the power. Everett was afraid. That was what she read under the crossed arms and the locked doors, and the way he checked her work on the tractor twice and found nothing wrong and checked it a third time anyway. Not cruelty, not greed, fear. The kind that comes from a specific history. She didn't know the history yet, but she was patient. The cassette player was in the study. She found it by accident 3 days in looking for a Phillips head screwdriver in the wrong drawer. It was on the bottom shelf of the bookcase beside Silas's desk. A cassette deck, the standalone kind from sometime in the 80s, with a single cassette still inside the compartment. The play button was stuck halfway. The whole unit had a fine layer of dust that suggested it had not moved in a long time. She picked it up, turned it over, set it down, picked it up again. She took it to the kitchen table and examined it under the light while Silas was napping, and Dottie had gone home, and the house was quiet except for the tick of the old clock in the hall. The mechanism was jammed. Not broken exactly. Jammed. She had dealt with worse. The man from her fourth placement, the one with the engines, the one who had taught her that things were rarely as dead as they looked, had started her on something not too different from this. She went to the shed and found the tools she needed. She worked through the evening. She worked past dinner. She ate leftover soup at the table with the disassembled mechanism spread across a dish towel in front of her. Every piece in order. She learned the shape of the problem. Then she found the specific piece that was the problem, a stuck pinch roller gummed with old lubricant that had dried into something that behaved more like adhesive. She cleaned it. She reassembled. She tested the belt tension. At 11 at night, she pressed play. The machine made a sound. Not music, just the sound of tape moving, the faint hiss of it, and then a guitar chord. Just one, struck soft, letting it ring. And then a voice, a woman's voice, young, 22 years old as advertised on the handwritten label. Low and clear and a little rough at the edges in a way that suggested she had not had lessons, but had it anyway. Had it naturally, the kind of thing that cannot be taught because it comes from somewhere too internal for instruction to reach. The woman on the tape said, "This is just something I've been working on. It's not finished yet. I don't know if it'll ever be finished, but I wanted to record it anyway in case." And then she played. And Wren sat at the kitchen table in a farmhouse on Crestline Road with her hands flat on the dish towel on either side of the dismantled machine and felt the voice go through her like weather. She knew that voice. Not from a memory of sound. She had been 12 when her mother died, and 12-year-olds do not always preserve the specific frequency of a voice, the timbre, the particular sound of a laugh. What she knew it from was older than memory. The way you know something that entered you before you had language for it, before you had any container for it at all. The voice sang a melody she could hum in her sleep, because she had. Because her mother had sung it over her from the time she was small, and Wren had taken it in the way children take, in the things that surround them, without deciding to, without knowing the words, without knowing it was anything other than just what the air in their home sounded like. She sat very still. She did not breathe for what might have been a full minute. And then the door to the study opened, and Silas came out, in his robe, moving slow. He had heard the music through the door, and he had come out, and he was standing in the hallway doorway looking at the cassette machine on the kitchen table with an expression that Ren had no name for. Because it was too many things at once. Like joy had opened a door inside him and grief had walked through it instead, and now both were in the room and neither one was going to leave. The tape played, the voice sang. Silas walked to the table very slowly. He put both hands on the back of a chair. He stood there and listened. His eyes were wet, and he did not bother doing anything about that. Ren looked at him. Then she stood up and walked past him. Quietly. She went into the hallway, and then she sat down on the floor with her back against the wall and she listened to her mother's voice coming through the kitchen doorway. 22 years old, before Ren existed, before everything. Just a young woman recording a song she hadn't finished yet, not knowing whether it would ever be finished, not knowing that her daughter would sit on a cold hallway floor 27 years later and finally hear what she sounded like when she was young and not yet afraid of anything. After a while, the tape clicked to the end. The machine went quiet. Silas did not come out of the kitchen for a long time. When he did, his face was the face of someone who has been somewhere very far away and has made it back but is still uncertain about the distance. "You fixed it," he said. His voice was barely there at all. "I did," Ren said from the floor. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Neither of them said anything else about it. But after that, something shifted in the air of the farmhouse. Something that had been held very still for a very long time took one small, careful breath. Dottie told her about Everett on a Wednesday. Not deliberately, not like a story she had decided to tell. The way people tell you the true things in the middle of doing something else, when the hands are busy and the defenses are down, and the truth just finds its way out sideways. They were in the kitchen. Dottie was making bread. Ren was organizing the shelf of spare parts from the press teardown, laying everything out on the counter in order smallest to largest, because order was how she thought. Dottie said without looking up from the dough, "He wasn't always like this." Ren didn't ask who. She already knew. "He had some hard years," Dottie said, "after his mother died, after the farm hit a bad stretch. He drank, not occasionally, the kind of drinking that gets into everything, runs everything through itself until nothing is itself anymore, just the drinking." Ren laid a gasket on the counter. "He went to treatment 3 times, Dottie said. The 3rd time the facility called Silas, because Everett had listed him as next of kin, the only name he put down. Silas drove 4 hours to get there, 4 hours each way in a truck with a bad heater in February. Ren aligned a bearing next to the gasket. He didn't say a word about it when they got back, Dottie said. He just handed Everett the keys to the machine shed. And he said," she paused, pressing the bread. "He said there's work to do. Start tomorrow." Ren was quiet. "Everett's been sober 5 years, Dottie said. He keeps the books. He runs the maintenance schedule. He drives Silas to every appointment." She paused again. "He keeps himself useful because useful is the thing that keeps him here." She shaped the loaf. "If this farm goes," Dottie said. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The shape of the unfinished sentence was perfectly clear. Ren looked at the pieces laid out on the counter. All the parts of the broken press in order. Each one in its place. The problem already located. The repair already mapped. She thought about a 4th placement. A man who smelled like oil and patience, who had handed her a broken transistor radio and said, "Find the thing that's actually wrong before you start replacing parts." She thought about how it was almost always one thing, one specific thing, and everything else looked broken because of it. She found Della's room on a Tuesday afternoon, by accident the way she found most things in this house, which was less accident than Patch leading her somewhere and declining to explain himself. She was carrying laundry up the back stairs, clean folded warm from the dryer. Patch was with her, which was most of the time now. He had decided on that first morning in the borrowed car that where Ren went, he went. Silas had stopped commenting on it. Everett had stopped commenting on it too, though differently the way you stop commenting on a thing, because commenting on it acknowledges its existence, and acknowledging its existence requires a position you haven't decided on yet. At the top of the stairs, Patch stopped. He planted himself in front of a door at the end of the hall, a door Wren had assumed was a closet. He looked at her, looked at the door, looked at her. "Pat," she said. He did not move. He sat down in front of the door and let out one single low note that was not quite a whine, more like a statement. "Fine." She tried the knob. The door opened on a room that time had simply stopped touching. Not dramatically, not like a scene in a movie where the dust falls in shafts of light and everything is arranged for maximum effect. Just a small room that had been closed and left to itself and had therefore remained exactly as someone had left it. A narrow bed with a quilt that had a pattern of interlocking circles in blue and green faded at the center, but still holding color at the edges. A shelf of paperback books, the spine sun-faded and tilted sideways. A desk with a chair pushed in. And on the walls, ribbons, a whole cascade of them. Red, blue, purple, hung from tacks in rows, layered and overlapping, the kind of collection that accumulates over years of a certain kind of childhood county fairs and school competitions and things that mattered a great deal to a girl of a specific age. Wren stepped closer. She read them. Best handmade pie crust, Dunbar County Fair. Della Dunbar, age 10. First chair, violin, regional youth orchestra. Della Dunbar, age 12. Grand champion youth division crest line, Apple Festival. Della Dunbar, age 13. She walked the room slowly, read every one. She stopped at the mirror above the desk. A school photograph was tucked into the frame. A girl of about 15 with a pointed chin and dark eyes and an expression that was not quite a smile. Not refusing to smile, just knowing something that smiles could not fully express. An expression that said, "I am here. I see you. I have opinions about what I see." Wren put her hand on the mirror frame. She had not looked in a lot of mirrors over the years. Mirrors in the system were usually the small industrial kind bolted too high, showing you only the top of your head unless you stood on something. But she knew her own face. She knew the jaw, the set of the eyes, the expression. She looked at the photograph of Della Dunbar at 15. Then she looked at herself. Then she sat down on the floor of her mother's childhood bedroom and put her face in Patch's gray ruff and cried. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that embarrasses no one because no one is there to see it. The kind you have been holding in a very small, controlled space for a very long time, and that is finally done with being held. Patch absorbed it without any comment. He was very good at that. She cried for her mother at 15, not knowing what was coming. She cried for herself at 12, not knowing what had been left behind. She cried for the distance between those two girls that should have been measured in years and was instead measured in something else entirely. Something with no good unit. And when she could breathe again, she took the sandwich bag out of her coat pocket and held the photograph up next to the height chart penciled into the doorframe. Marks climbing in careful increments. Each one dated a year and a month, the lines getting less precise as Della got older, the way you stop being exact about things as you age, as you understand that exact does not always mean what you thought it meant. The mark stopped at a line labeled simply 18. Nothing above it. The last line, the year she left. Wren held the photograph up next to that last mark. The little girl on the porch, age 4, standing at the same height as the last mark her mother had ever made in this doorway. Like they were measuring themselves against the same thing. Like they had always been measuring themselves against the same thing, without ever knowing it. That evening, Silas found her quieter than usual by the wood stove. He misread it. The way people misread grief when it's wearing the face of stillness. "Everett say something to you?" he asked. "No." She looked up. "Tell me about her." He knew who she meant. He didn't ask. He just sat down at the kitchen table with his coffee, and he told her. He told her about Miriam, Della's mother, who had died when Della was 6 years old from something the doctors had caught too late. He told her about being a man of 34 with a daughter and an orchard, and no idea how to do either one properly without the person who had been the reason both things made sense. He had loved Della too hard and too badly, he said. The way you love something when you are terrified of losing it. All rules, all fences, because the fences felt like safety, because he thought if he could just keep her inside them, inside the things he could control, then nothing else could be taken from him. She was wild and bright and furious at the fences. Obviously, she pushed at every one, not out of cruelty, out of the energy of a person who was more than the shape of the container they've been given. And the summer she turned 18, she told him she was leaving. With someone. Someone Silas had never liked and had said so clearly too many times and in the wrong ways. And he had said the worst thing, the thing he had been carrying ever since. He had said, if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back. He had said it because he thought it would scare her into staying. It did not scare her into staying. It just showed her the door. She took him at his word. She walked out. And Silas, who was too proud to chase her and who believed incorrectly that pride was the same as dignity, waited for her to come back first. She did not come back first. Neither did he. And by the time the pride wore through to what was underneath it, which was just a father who missed his daughter and would have given the orchard in both his hands to take back one sentence she was gone past finding. I looked for her, Silas said. His voice had something cracked running through it like old plaster, the kind that is still holding, but you can see the history of every stress it has endured. I hired a man. He found a city, then a street, then a trail gone cold. He turned his coffee cup. I used to think she was punishing me. He looked at the dark window, that she wanted me to feel it. Maybe I did deserve to feel it. But then I stopped thinking that. He was quiet for a moment. I think maybe we were both too proud. And the time ran out on us before either of us figured out how to be less proud than we were. Wren sat very still. Her hand was already moving toward her coat pocket. And then Silas said the thing that made her hand stop. I have to tell you something. And he said it the way you say things you have been carrying alone for a long time. Heavily. Like setting something down on a table between you. He did not look at her. The first night you poured my coffee before I asked. I almost drove off the road on the way home. She waited. You've got her face, he said. My Della's face. The jaw, the eyes, the way you go still when you're thinking hard about something. He swallowed. I told myself it was nothing, that old men see their children in strangers when they miss them badly enough. But I came back the next night, and the night after, and I couldn't stop coming back. He looked at his hands. And that last cold night, I sat in the truck for an hour before I came in. I meant to show you that photograph. I meant to ask if it could possibly mean anything, but I lost my nerve, so I left the wallet on the counter with the picture in it. He paused. I told myself I forgot it. He looked up. The truth is, I was not brave enough to put it in your hands directly. So I left it where a good person might find it. And then he said, quiet, I prayed you were as good as you looked. Wren sat across the table from her grandfather and could not make a single sound come out of her mouth. Not because she didn't have things to say, because she had too many things to say and the wrong moment had found her before the right one could. Because Everett was moving somewhere in the house footsteps on the old boards, and she had one photograph and a fixed cassette machine and a matching board and a set of eyes. And it was not enough. It had to be more than enough. It had to be the kind of proof that nobody in any room could look at and call convenient. That nobody could call a story built on a girl's wishful thinking. I think, she said carefully, around the ache in her throat. I think a person would want to be very sure before she said anything, so she didn't break your heart twice. Silas was quiet. Then he nodded. That'd be a kind girl, he said. Kinder than I ever was. And she decided. That night, lying in the room above the kitchen with the orchard outside the window and Patch breathing on the rug beside her, she decided she was going to find something solid, something that stood on its own feet. She was going to do it before spring, before the bank deadline, before anything else could be taken from this man who had already lost too much. She was going to find the proof, and then she was going to lay it all down clean and whole. She called Vera from the orchard the next afternoon. Walking the back row where the signal was better, the gnarled tree at the far corner within sight, the one Silas said was the oldest and still gave the sweetest apples. She didn't explain everything. Not yet. She didn't have words for all of it in the right order yet. She just said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it. Did you ever meet anyone named Della at the diner? Maybe. Years ago. A pause. Vera's pauses had texture. You could feel what was in them. Vera said, and stopped. Vera. Another pause. Come in tomorrow morning, before I open. Ren drove into town the next day at 7. The diner was dark except for the light above the counter, the one Vera always left on. The door was unlocked. Ren pushed in and sat on the second stool from the left, which was her usual stool, and waited. Vera came out from the back. She was not carrying coffee. She was carrying a box. A shoebox, old, the lid held down with a rubber band that had gone sticky with age. She set it on the counter in front of Ren and sat down on the other side. Ren looked at the box, then at Vera. You should open it, Vera said. Inside were things that accumulate in the kind of place that stays open all night for decades and becomes, without trying, to a way station for people in the middle of going from one version of their lives to another. Photographs, notes, a paperback left behind, a child's drawing, the flotsam of strangers who sit at a counter for a while and then leave. Vera reached in and found a photograph, a Polaroid, the kind that develops in front of you like a small miracle. She held it out. A young woman, standing at the counter of this diner, smiling the kind of smile you smile when you are between things and the diner is warm, and someone pointed a camera at you and you decided to let the moment be. The woman was 25, maybe 26. Dark hair, a pointed jaw, dark eyes, on the back Della, passing through. 2003. Ren held the photograph with both hands. She knew the math. 2003. Della would have been 27. Ren would have been 2 years old, wherever she was being kept while her mother was passing through. She stayed 3 weeks, Vera said. I needed help and she needed money. She didn't talk about where she came from. She talked about a lot of things. Music, broken car engines, what it felt like to drive west until the roads changed, but not where she came from. Vera folded her hands on the counter. She just said once that she had a father, somewhere she had come from, and that she missed it in a way that didn't help anything to miss, because you couldn't go back when you'd said what she'd said and done what she'd done. Ren looked at the woman in the Polaroid, her mother at 27, between Crestline Road and wherever she eventually landed, between who she had been and who she was going to have to become. I kept it, Vera said. I don't know why I kept it. You keep things sometimes and you can't say why. She reached across the counter and put her hand over Ren's. I knew your mother, Vera said, only for 3 weeks, but she was the kind of person you don't forget the specific shape of. She stopped. She looked at Ren for a long time. She had your eyes, Vera said, and she ate like someone was about to take the plate. Ren looked up. I started feeding you the second week, Vera said, when you showed up at the gas station, because you ate the same way. That means someone taught you that food is not guaranteed and the muscle memory never leaves. A long, full silence. I didn't know, Vera said quietly. I didn't know until just now, looking at you next to this photograph, how much I was hoping you'd turn out to be hers. Ren did not speak, because she was holding a Polaroid of her 27-year-old mother in a diner she had been eating in for 2 years without knowing it, and the world was either very small or very deliberate, and she honestly could not decide which one was harder to absorb. She folded the Polaroid. Can I keep this? Vera closed the shoebox. Honey, Vera said, that photograph has been waiting for you since 2003. She was in the barn the following Thursday afternoon when Everett came in. She heard him before she saw him. His boots on the concrete, the sound of someone walking with a purpose that is also a decision. She was on the floor with the press mechanism spread out in front of her, each piece laid on a canvas drop cloth. Her hands already wiped clean because she always wiped before the conversation, whatever conversation was coming. He had a folder in his hand. He stood in the barn door for a moment, just looking at her on the floor with the pieces in front of her. I made some calls, he said. She waited. He came in. The barn light was not great. Just the two overhead fluorescents in the gray daylight through the open door. He looked tired. Not tonight tired, longer than that. You aged out of the county system last year. He said it flat. No anger in it. No meanness. Just stating coordinates. No family listed, no next of kin. That's right. Him. Then he said, my mother's name was Miriam. She died when I was 4. Silas adopted me when he married my mother before she died. He added that quietly, like it needed saying. Wren set down the cleaning rag. He looked at the folder. I found a case file, not yours, Della's, from when she was briefly in the system after she left, before she sorted herself out. And the caseload notes have a reference to a daughter. No name, no age, but the right time frame. He looked at her. The right face, he said. It was not an accusation. That was the thing. It was not what she had expected. It was something else. Something she was not sure she had a name for from him yet. I'm not going to ask you to prove it to me, he said, because I think I already know. He set the folder on the corner of the press housing. I've known since the first day in the yard. He rubbed the back of his neck. He's dying. She said it straight because straight was the only way. I know that. And you love him. She said that straight too. He did not answer immediately. Then he drove 4 hours to get me, he said, in February, in a truck with a heater that was more of a suggestion. He drove 4 hours and brought me back here and handed me the shed keys and didn't say a single word about what it had cost him. He didn't say a single word about any of it. Ever. He looked at the pieces of the press laid out in order on the cloth. I have spent 5 years trying to be worth that drive, he said, and I don't know if I'll ever get there. But I know that if this farm goes, I lose the place where I can keep trying. Wren looked at him. He looked back. And for the first time since she had arrived on Crestline Road, neither of them was protecting themselves from the other. They were just two people standing in a coal barn with a broken machine between them and an old man in the house who mattered to both of them in completely different ways and for completely the same reason. She said, I'm not here to take anything from you. He said, I know. She said, I fixed the press. You want to see a pause? He looked at the pieces on the cloth. Show me, he said. She had been reassembling the press for 3 days by then, and she was on the last stage. Everett crouched down beside her and watched. He did not offer help. He had the intelligence she noticed to understand that help not requested was interference, and interference was not what this moment needed. He just watched. Occasionally he asked something specific, and she answered, and he nodded. When the wheel turned, the first clean turn it had made in 3 seasons, they both went quiet. The sound of it was the sound of a thing working the way it was designed to work. Simple. Complete. The wheel turned and the mechanism engaged and the gears moved in the right relationship to each other, and there was no grinding, no protest. Everett sat back on his heels. That's going to change things, he said. I know. There's still the debt, he said, the banknote, the Crestline development offer. He said it flat, not a negotiation, just facts on the table. If we don't have a plan by end of month. I have a plan, Wren said. She wiped her hands on the cloth. Not just the press, not just the cider. She had been thinking for 2 weeks, lying in the room above the kitchen looking out at the orchard and thinking about what this place could be, about what she had always needed and never had, about the gap between what this farm was and what it could hold. She told him. She watched his face as she talked. And then she heard Dottie calling from the yard, calling both of them. Her voice had a quality that was not ordinary, not the ordinary voice of someone needing a hand with something. This was different, sharper, with something underneath it that made Ren's stomach go cold before her brain had even decoded the words. They both moved at the same time. He was on the floor by the wood stove, gray, one hand pressed flat to his chest, moving his lips on something that would not come out. His eyes were open and tracking, and he knew where he was. She could see that he had not gone somewhere else yet, but he was using everything he had just to stay present in the room, and not enough of it was available for the other things. She was on her knees before she had decided to move. She got his head into her lap. She put her hand over his. She felt under her fingers the way his heartbeat was doing something wrong. Not stopped, just wrong. Everett was on the phone. Dottie was at the door. And Ren stayed where she was on the kitchen floor of the farmhouse on Crestline Road with her grandfather's head in her lap, and she talked to him. She talked about the press turning. She talked about the wheel running clean and true for the first time in 3 seasons, and what that meant for the fall. She talked about the oldest tree in the north plot and how it was going to need specific attention before the buds came in. She talked about practical things, real things, things that were only relevant if he was going to be here for them. She did not say the other thing, the thing that had been living behind her teeth for 3 weeks. Because not like this, not on a kitchen floor with the cold coming through the gaps and his heart doing something wrong under her hand. Not like this. Everett came and knelt on the other side. He put his hand on Silas's arm. Silas looked at him. His eyes tracked. Everett said in a voice stripped of everything except the truth, "You stay right there. You hear me? You stay right there." Silas looked at him. Then he looked at Ren. And something moved in his face that she did not have a word for. Not recognition, not surprise. Something older than either of those. The ambulance took 11 minutes. Ren counted every single one. The plastic chairs in the waiting room were the color of old mustard, which was not a color anyone should have to sit with at midnight. But there they were, 13 of them in a row under lights that buzzed the same pitch as the gas station lights on Route 9. And Ren thought not for the first time that certain kinds of waiting rooms and certain kinds of fluorescent lights found each other, the way unhappy things tend to find each other, drawn together, kept company by their mutual unpleasantness. She was on chair 4. Everett was on chair 7. 3 chairs between them. Not a decision exactly, just where they had each arrived when they sat down separately within 30 seconds of each other, which meant the 3-chair distance was less a statement and more just the shape of 2 people who had not yet negotiated what they were to each other in a room like this one. A vending machine hummed in the corner. Somewhere down a hall, a television played to no one. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Everett said, without looking up from the floor, "The dispatcher said a young woman was doing the breathing counts. Kept him going till they got there. Ren said, 'My foster father,' before his heart attack. He taught me." Everett looked at her then, for the first time since they had arrived, actually looked. He said, "Your foster father had a heart attack." "Yes, and he had taught you what to do if someone else had one." "Yes, and you were living in a gas station stockroom." "Yes." He looked back at the floor. He put his face in his hands. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all its architecture, all the framework he had built to keep it upright. It just came out flat and exhausted and true. "I've been so scared of losing the farm," he said, "that I forgot to be scared of losing him." Ren looked at the side of his face. "That makes you human," she said. "That's all that is, just human." He didn't answer. A nurse walked past, shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The vending machine made a decision about something and hummed louder for a moment and then settled. Everett pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "He took me to a game once," he said, "out of nowhere. Just set it into the space between them. A baseball game. I was 8 years old. He had just married my mother. I was the kid of the man she'd had an affair with, and I think we all knew it, even though nobody said so. He took me to the game, just the two of us. He bought me a hot dog and a bag of peanuts, and we sat in the cheap seats, and he didn't say anything about what I was or where I came from or what any of it meant. He stopped. He just sat there with me, Everett said. Like sitting with me was enough. Wren waited. I have turned that afternoon over in my head my whole life, he said. Like it was a proof. Like if I could just figure out what it proved, I'd know something important. He pressed harder. I still don't know what it proves. I just know I still think about it. He dropped his hands. Looks like he chose you, Wren said quietly. Looks like he did that a long time ago. Everett did not answer. But something in him, some tightly wound thing that had been wound for decades, gave one small turn in the other direction. It was not much, but it was a start. A doctor came out near midnight. She was young, younger than seemed right for delivering information of this weight. She had the careful expression of someone who has learned to say hard things without making them harder. She said, he's stable. The clot has been addressed. His heart is failing. The slow kind. The kind that doesn't reverse. The kind that gets managed, not fixed. She looked at her chart, then at them. He's been asking for someone, she said, since he came around. He was very specific about the name. She looked down. He's asking for Wren. Everett's head came up. Wren was already standing. 2 minutes, the doctor said. He needs to rest. The room was small. The machines were the kind that make your heart beat into a visual event. Green lines on a dark screen, each one a small argument for still being here. The fluorescent light above the bed was turned down to its lowest setting, and in the dimness, Silas looked both smaller and more himself than she had ever seen him. Like the hospital had stripped away the performance of being fine and left just the man. He found her the second she came through the curtain. His eyes were clear. That was the thing she noticed first. Clear and steady, even after everything, even in the low light in the tubes and the monitor drawing his tired heart in green. You said something, he said. His voice was the thinnest she had heard it, like something wound on a spool that was almost at the end. Before I went under, I've been lying here trying to decide if I dreamed it. Wren pulled the chair close. She sat. She took his hand in both of hers and held it. Her heart was doing the thing again. The knocking, steady, certain. But this time she did not look away, and she did not save herself. You didn't dream it, she said. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat. The sandwich bag was there. She had been carrying it for 7 years, and it knew the shape of her hand perfectly by now, the way things do when you have held them through enough. She slid the photograph free. Her half, the torn one, the one with the man with no face. She put it in his hand, face up, the farmhouse porch, the patient dog, the little girl crouching with one hand buried in the fur at the dog's neck. Silas went very still. My mother gave me this, Wren said. It's the only thing I have of her. She wore your face right off it. I used to lie awake wondering who you were. She turned the photograph over for him, gently, so his shaking hands did not have to. On the back, in a woman's handwriting, careful and a little tired. Home. Silas's thumb moved over the letters, very slowly. That's Della's hand, he whispered. That's my Della's grown-up hand. She wrote that. His throat worked. She tore my face out of the picture. And she still called it home. Her name was Della Dunbar, Wren said. She went by Della Calder. She named me Wren. She never told me she had a father. She never told me she had an orchard or a farmhouse or a single living soul who was looking for her. She said our family was gone and that it made her too sad to talk about. She paused. She got sick when I was 11. She died the spring I turned 12. I held her hand in a room a lot like this one. She pressed his hand to her wet cheek. She looked at him. The last real thing she ever said to me, Wren said, was that I should find my way home. And I didn't know what she meant, because I didn't have one. I had never had one. She held his gaze. I do now, she said. I found it. You're my grandfather. I'm Della's girl. I've been pouring your coffee for 2 months, and I didn't know how to tell you. And I'm sorry it took me so long. And I'm sorry it's happening in a room like this one. And I'm sorry about all of it. About everything she took from you by leaving, and everything you took from yourself by not going after her. I'm sorry for all the years and all the distance and all the silence. She stopped because she was out of words. Because some things are larger than the sentence structure available to hold them. Silas looked at her for a long moment. His free hand came up. He touched her face, her jaw, her cheekbone, reading her the way a man reads a thing he has been searching for so long he needs to confirm it with more than one sense. She held still and let him, because she understood. He was holding up the photograph he had been carrying for 26 years and checking it against the face in front of him. Finding it true. You're real, he whispered. I'm real. I'm not dreaming you. I'm right here. He closed his eyes. The monitor drew his heartbeat in steady green, and Wren put her head down on the side of the bed beside his arm and felt the enormous, complicated weight of 2 decades of silence, finally settling somewhere it could rest. The 2 minutes became 20. Nobody came to end it. Silas learned 2 things in that room on the same night. His daughter was gone, and his granddaughter was holding his hand. Both things at once. The grief and the gift so tangled together that no human hand could have separated them. He wept without any shame at all, and Wren wept with him. And in the morning she was still in the chair by his bed, her coat pulled around her, and when he woke he looked at her immediately like making sure she was still the real thing, and she was. She was still there. She was not going anywhere. Silas's lawyer came 2 days later. A quiet man, soft leather folder, reading glasses on a chain not so different from Vera's. He drove from the county seat and set up at the rolling tray table in Silas's room with the careful efficiency of someone who has had difficult conversations in hospital rooms before and has learned to make the practical parts as painless as possible. He opened the folder. He laid out a document. Wren sat in the corner. She had been about to leave, give them the room, which was what you did. You gave people their legal privacy. Except the lawyer had looked at her when he came in and said, actually, Miss Calder, you should probably stay for this. So she stayed. The document was a trust, opened 18 years ago. The beneficiary was listed as the child or children of Della Dunbar Calder, daughter of Silas Elliott Dunbar, in the event that said child or children are located in identity confirmed. 18 years ago. Wren did the math. She had been 1 year old. Silas, the lawyer, said, without looking up, retained a private investigator beginning approximately 26 years ago, shortly after Della left. The investigator tracked her to several cities over the following 11 years. He turned a page. 18 years ago, the investigator located a record of a child, female, age 1, in the county foster system under a family name that did not match. The trail was lost when records were transferred between counties during a jurisdictional reorganization. He looked up. He said, at that point, Mr. Dunbar established this trust, in the event the child was ever located. Wren looked at Silas. Silas was looking at his hands. You knew I existed, she said. He nodded. Barely. For 18 years. I knew a child existed. He said it carefully. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know your name or your face. I just knew there was a 1-year-old girl in a system somewhere who might be Della's. He looked up. I couldn't find you. I tried. He stopped. I kept trying until I ran out of ways to try. And then she understood. Something cold and clear moving through her like water finding its level. She said the debt. He was quiet. The banknote, she said it slowly. The money you owe, you borrowed it. He said nothing. Everett, she said. She looked at Everett, who was standing by the window. Did you know Everett said, I found out this week? He set something on the windowsill, a folder, his own. She had not noticed it when he came in. He hired the investigator for 11 years, Everett said. After the trail went cold, he borrowed against the farm to keep looking. When the borrowing ran out, he established the trust with what was left. He looked at Silas, then at Wren. The banknote isn't from bad harvests. It's not from market conditions. It's from looking for Della. The room was perfectly still. The farm is in debt, Wren said. Yes. Because he spent the money. Yes. Looking for her. Looking for her daughter, Everett said. Looking for you. Wren sat in the corner chair in the hospital room and looked at the man in the bed and tried to find a thought that was large enough to contain what she was feeling. She could not find one. The feeling was larger than any thought she had. The farm was going to be lost to a bank because an old man had spent every resource he had trying to find the child his daughter had left behind. He had not even known her name. He had just known she existed, and he had spent everything. Silas said, "I'd spend it again." He said it plainly, not defensively, just as a statement of fact, the way you state the things you are most certain of. "I know," Wren said. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. She said, "Then we need to make sure it wasn't for nothing." She looked at Everett. Everett looked back. And both of them reached the same place at the same time from completely different directions. The lawyer set a date for the DNA confirmation. A cheek swab. Simple. Wren had expected to feel something about this, something adversarial, the clinical quality of being proven, but instead she just felt tired and then surprisingly grateful. Because proof meant nobody could argue. There was just Everett, who had arrived at his own version of the truth before the test, and who looked at the two photographs set side by side on the rolling tray table with the expression of a man doing arithmetic that comes out differently than he expected. He found her in the hallway after. She was getting bad coffee from the vending machine. Bad coffee was apparently a constant in her life. She was starting to think this was just the shape of things. "It's real," he said. "Not a question. Not this time." "Yes." He leaned against the wall. He said, "You want to know the part I'm ashamed of?" She waited. "I needed you to be running a con." He said it straight. "I needed it because if you were running a con, I could stop you and be the one who saved him. And if you're not a con, if I'm not, if you're not, then you're blood. And blood changes the math." Wren looked at him. "You think it means you lose something?" He looked at his hands, his knuckles, the 30 years of machinery hands. "I spent my whole life trying to be useful enough that he wouldn't leave." He said it without drama, just fact. Same flat delivery he used for the numbers in the ledger. Because useful was the thing I knew how to be. Wanted was the thing I was never sure of. Wren thought of herself in 7 placements. Doing dishes without being asked, getting good grades, being very quiet and very careful and very easy to have around. "I know that feeling," she said. "I've lived inside it." She looked at him. "So I'm not going to do to you what the world did to me." He went still. "Which is what make you feel like there isn't enough room for both of us." The vending machine hummed. She said, "I don't want the farm, Everett. I want him. That's all I came here for. To know I came from somebody. To know somebody would have kept me if they'd known where to look." She looked at him directly. He looked back. She held out her hand. "Partners," she said. "Real ones. On paper. So nobody can ever put either of us out." He looked at her hand for a long time. Then he looked at her face. Then he said in a voice that was very quiet, "He's not even out of the hospital yet, and you're already trying to save the thing. I've been destroying myself to save." "I learned it from somebody," Wren said. "An old man at a gas station. Wouldn't take a reward. Drove $1,000 back into a stranger's hands because he would rather be broke than cheap." She kept her hand out. "Turns out he was my grandfather." She waited. "Turns out it runs in the family." And Everett Dunbar, who had given the better part of his life to a father who was never quite his, reached out in a hospital hallway and shook the hand of the granddaughter who had just refused to take his home away from him. It was not a dramatic moment. which was maybe why it mattered so much. They went to the bank on a Tuesday. Everett wore his only suit, the dark one, the one that came out for funerals and county hearings and the occasions that required you to be more formal than you felt. Wren wore clean coveralls and her work boots and her coat. She had thought about dressing up. She had exactly 0 things to dress up in, which solved the problem efficiently. They sat across the desk from the loan officer, a woman who had grown up in this county. Who had she mentioned almost in passing been drinking Dunbar Farm cider since she was tall enough to reach the table at the county fair? Everett laid out the books, every number, the real ones, the bad years, the borrowed years, the debt in its origin and his best projection for what the harvest could do if the press was running and the fall festival went forward, and the wholesale contract he had been quietly building with 2 restaurants in town was signed. Then Wren set the press report on the desk. Running again, she said, after 3 dead seasons, tested last week. Then she laid out the proposal. Not just the cider, that was part of it, but not the whole. She had been working on the other part for 2 weeks, lying in the room above the kitchen, looking at the orchard through the window, thinking about what she had always needed and never had access to, and what this place could be for someone in the same position. The Dunbar Farm Youth Program. Partnership with the County Foster Services Office. 6 slots initially. Teenagers aging out of the system or close to it. Room meals paid, agricultural work in a mentor. The program was eligible for state funding and a federal agricultural education grant she had found at 2 in the morning on the farm's barely functional desktop computer. She laid the grant document on the desk. Crestline Development's offer was also on the desk. She had put it there herself. She wanted the loan officer to see both at once. This, Wren said, pointing to the grant, or this pointing to the offer. If we get the extension, we can earn our way clear inside 18 months. If we sell, the land is gone, the trees are gone, and the kids who could have spent a summer learning something real on those trees. She stopped. They don't get the summer. The loan officer looked at the documents. She looked at the 2 people across her desk. She said, I'm going to need a week. She got the week. At the end of the week, she called. She said yes. Silas came home on a Thursday in March. The air smelled like the edge of something changing. Not yet spring, but not entirely winter anymore either. That moment when the cold is still present but has stopped meaning it. Wren and Everett had cleaned the house. Not performatively, just the kind of cleaning that happens when 2 people want a place to be ready for someone who is coming home, and cleaning is the thing their hands know how to do with that feeling. Dottie had made soup. Patch had positioned himself on the rug in front of the kitchen door and would not be moved. He had been there since 6 in the morning, waiting. When the truck pulled in and Silas came out slow with his cane and looked up at the farmhouse that needed paint and the barn that needed more than paint and the bare patient rows of trees, something in his face changed. It was not a dramatic change. It was the change that happens when something fits back into the place it had always been and the whole structure settles. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at the house. He said, well, that was all. Just well. And then he climbed the steps, one careful step at a time, with Wren on one side and Everett on the other. And neither of them said anything about being there. They were just there. And that was the point. Winter let go of the orchard slowly, one gray week giving up to the next. And somewhere in the middle of it, between the bank extension and the first grant check and the restaurant contract and the wholesale agreement Everett had finalized by phone on the kitchen table, while Silas listened from his chair with an expression of cautious satisfaction, they saved the place. Not with a single dramatic check. Not with luck. With Tuesdays. With the accumulation of Tuesday mornings that are actually work. The press running, the cider being made, the farm stand at the mouth of the driveway with its shutters pried off and repainted in an afternoon. Vera putting the first batch of Dunbar Farm cider on her counter with a handwritten sign and telling every person who came in about the girl who had come home. People drove out just to see, and while they were there, they bought cider. And while they were buying cider, they saw the farm stand and the orchard and the barn which was no longer a disgrace because Wren had worked on it through February one corner at a time until it was not beautiful, but it was sound, and sound was what mattered. The DNA test came back in April. The lawyer called on a Wednesday morning while Wren was on a ladder in the north plot pruning the oldest tree. She already knew what it would say. She had known since the broken board in the photograph. She had known since the moment Patch put his whole gray head in her lap and settled his weight against her legs like he had been waiting his whole life for exactly this. But she listened anyway, because some things deserve to be received properly. She stayed on the ladder for a while after the call ended, looked out over the orchard from up there, all those rows, the early bloomers just beginning to show something at the tips of the branches, the first almost green of the year, 120 acres. Her grandfather's father had set out the first trees by hand. Her grandfather had put in the rest himself. Her mother had grown up running between these rows, and she was here now, up a ladder, in the morning light, which was not nothing, which was in fact everything. She climbed down. She went inside and told Silas. He sat in his chair and listened, and then he looked out the window for a long time. Out at the trees. Well, he said finally. I know, Wren said. He reached out his hand. She took it. They sat that way for a while, not talking, just sitting, which was enough. In April, the first two teenagers arrived. A girl of 17 from the county placement system, a boy of 16 from a group home in the next county over. They came on a Sunday with their bags and their careful "I have been here before," and it didn't last expressions, and Wren met them in the driveway and showed them the room above the kitchen, which she had moved out of, and into the room next to Silas's, and showed them the barn and the orchard and the press, and gave them each a cup of cider from the first pressing, and watched them drink it. The girl looked at her over the cup. Is this real? She said. It's real, Wren said. And it's yours while you're here, as long as you want it. She watched the girl's face. She recognized every part of the expression it made. She had worn it herself, in 7 different placements. The face of someone who wants to believe and is not yet sure if believing is the thing that will help or the thing that will hurt. Give it a week, Wren said. You don't have to believe it yet. Just give it 1 week. The girl looked at the orchard, then at her cup. Then she drank the rest of the cider. The festival was on a Saturday in May. Vera closed the diner for the day. She drove out with 3 cases of cider, 2 of her own pies, and a handwritten sign that said in letters large enough to read, "From the road Dunbar Farm is open. Wren's home." She had not asked permission for the sign. Wren had looked at it and not said anything about not asking permission. Half the county came up the long driveway which Wren and Everett had spent 2 weeks grading smooth with equipment borrowed from the neighboring property because the ruts had gotten ambitious over the years. There were children in the orchard rows, a man with a fiddle on the porch, the press running all afternoon, turning the last of the stored winter apples into cider that Everett poured and Wren carried, and Dottie supervised with the efficiency of a woman who believes that supervision is the same as doing it yourself, but with more satisfying results. Silas sat in a chair set right in the middle of the blooming trees, a blanket over his knees, a cup in his hands. The April blossoms had held into early May, which the old-timers said was a good sign, which meant an argument about whether good signs were real, that the old-timers won by being old-timers and therefore having more data. He watched the people in his orchard. His whole face was lit. Not the performative kind of lit, the kind that comes from the inside, like a lamp turned on in a room that had been dark for a long time. Wren came to check on him between rounds. She crouched by his chair. You need anything? He looked at her. I need you to stop fussing over me for 5 minutes so I can watch. She stood up. I'll fuss in 10. He waved her away. She went, and she moved through the orchard with the people in it. Neighbors she knew by name now. The 2 program kids who had come in April, both of them holding cups. The girl from the county placement, standing in a row of trees with her head tilted back, looking up at the blossoms with an expression that Wren thought might actually be the first unguarded expression she had seen on that particular face. She kept walking. And Vera found her between rows in the late afternoon and pulled her into a hard, quick hug that smelled of pie crust and coffee and 2 years of end-of-night eggs. "You promised you'd tell me," Vera said into her shoulder. "I know." "So," Wren told her. "All of it. The wallet, the photograph, the cassette tape, the two photographs side by side, the farmhouse kitchen and the coffee, and the old man who had been watching her in the security mirror every night because he could see his daughter's face in the girl behind the counter." Vera listened with one hand pressed over her mouth. Her eyes went bright and then bright and then brighter. When Wren finished, Vera took her hand off her mouth and pressed it to her heart instead. "I always knew you weren't nobody," Vera said. "I knew it the first night I fed you. You walked in and you looked at those eggs like they were something serious. And I thought, this one has been paying attention. This one is going to be fine." Wren said, "You told me not to be cheap, and you weren't." "No." Vera squeezed her arm. "Look what it bought you." They stood in the orchard in the Maylight, the blossoms everywhere, the fiddle playing from the porch. And Wren thought about a tin of spearmint mints and $14 and a fluorescent light buzzing and a wallet on a counter and one decision made in the cold. Which had led here, to this, to blossoms and borrowed cars and a dog who decided before anyone else had, and a man who put her name in a trust before he knew her face, and a press running clean, and a program that would give 6 kids per year a summer in the trees. One decision, in the cold, at 2 in the morning, under bad light. The lawyer came back in June. Final documents. Everything signed, everything in order. Wren's name on the deed beside Everett's. Real partners, on paper. Neither one ever able to put the other out. Everett called her partner in front of people now. Without any self-consciousness about it, he just said it. My partner. Like it was the most natural arrangement in the world. Like it had always been the plan. She caught him telling one of the program kids about the press one afternoon. She came around the corner of the barn, and there he was, crouched down, showing the boy how the mechanism engaged, explaining the restoration with the patient detail of someone who understands that the difference between a kid who stays and a kid who runs is sometimes just one adult who takes the time. She stayed around the corner. She listened. She had to go stand in the barn for a minute to get her face right. She was getting better at needing to stand in barns and get her face right. Silas got the summer, and the summer was his in the way that things are yours when you know the count is finite, and you have decided to spend what remains with your full attention rather than looking away from it. He taught her the orchard the way his father had taught him. Morning by morning, which trees to thin in when, how to read the skin of an apple for ripeness without cutting it, how a frost warning in the forecast needed to be taken personally, how to understand a sky. He had opinions about every tree, and he shared them. She started carrying a small notebook and writing things down because there was more information than she could hold in her head at once, and also because writing it down felt like keeping it, felt like making a record of him that could outlast the circumstances, and she needed that. She needed the record. On good afternoons, Everett brought out a second chair, and the three of them sat on the porch or at the edge of the orchard, not saying much with Patch, between them going grayer week by week, and the silence between them was not the silence of things unsaid, but the silence of things that did not need to be said because they were already known. That kind of silence, the comfortable kind, the earned kind. One evening in August, Silas fell asleep in his chair on the porch with a half-eaten piece of Dottie's pie balanced on his knee and Wren's hand in his. She sat very still so as not to wake him. The light was doing something extraordinary with the orchard, the late-day angle of it, making every leaf look like it was lit from inside. She thought if a whole life could end in a moment shaped like this one, it would not be a bad bargain. She thought it without sadness, which surprised her, which was maybe the whole point. He died in the fall, the week the first apples came ripe. In the downstairs room that had been his mother's room, the one with the window that looked out over the north plot, the old trees, the ones his father had planted, the ones that gave the sweetest fruit. The window was open. The smell of the orchard came through. Apples and cold air and the cleanness of early October in farm country. The smell of something completing itself. Wren held one hand. Patch had his chin on the other. Everett stood in the doorway. He had been there for an hour. He had a cup of coffee, he had stopped drinking, and he was just standing there being present, which was, she had come to understand what Everett did when he loved something. He showed up and he stood in the doorway. Dottie was somewhere in the kitchen. There was food because Dottie handled grief by making sure no one had to think about food. Silas had been drifting in and out for 2 days. The doctor had come and gone. Everyone understood what was happening, and no one needed it explained. He came back to the surface in the late afternoon. His eyes found Wren. "Still here," she said, before he could ask. He smiled. It was not a large smile, just a movement at the corners, but it was entirely him. He looked at the window, at the orchard. His thumb moved over the back of her hand. He said very quietly, "Leave the porch light on." "Yes," she said. "Leave it on," he said. "For the kids. I will." He looked at the orchard one more time, and then he went to sleep and did not wake. And the room was quiet except for Patch breathing and the orchard outside the window doing what it had always done, being itself regardless. Wren sat there for a long time, his hand in hers, the orchard going blue in the evening light. She had held her mother's hand in a room like this when she was 12 years old, and she had not known what to do with the size of the leaving. She had been so small then, and the leaving had been so large, and there had been no one to explain the proportion of it to her. She was not small now. She was still not sure she had words for the proportion. But she was not alone in the room, and she had not been alone for a long time, and Silas Dunbar had made sure of that. Even from the beginning, even before he knew her name or her face, even when all he had was the knowledge that a child existed somewhere in a system that processed children like paperwork, he had made sure he had left the light on. She read Della's diary in the evenings, a page a night, careful, the way you ration the last of something that cannot be replaced. Most of it was the ordinary weather of a teenager's life. A horse she loved, arguments with Silas about curfews and freedom, and the claustrophobia of being deeply loved in a way that does not leave enough room to breathe. But the final pages were written the week she left. "I can't stay here and watch him be right about me," one of them said. "He thinks I'll fail and come crawling back. Maybe I will, but I need to be the one who decides it, even if deciding it ruins me." And the last entry, in a hand already shaking with something more than just youth. "I keep the picture from the porch. I rubbed his face off it because I couldn't look at him and still make myself go. But I can't throw it out either. Some part of me is always going to be standing on that porch. Some part of me is always going to be his." Wren read that last line many times. Her mother had not hated this place. Her mother had been homesick her whole life. And she had handed the homesickness down to a daughter without knowing she was doing it. Had passed it on the way you pass on eye color in the set of a jaw, and the way you go still when you are thinking hard about something. A daughter who had spent years not knowing the name of the home she was missing. Now she did. December. The first hard frost had come and gone. The orchard was bare all lines and patience waiting on the spring it already knew was coming, even if the current evidence suggested otherwise. Wren drove out to Route 9 on a Friday evening. She had a jar of cider on the seat beside her. Vera's diner was closed for the night already, but there was a light on inside, which meant Vera was doing the books, which was a lie, Vera told herself every Friday evening, when the truth was she just liked sitting in her own diner when it was quiet. But that was not where Wren was going. She pulled into the gas station. 2 pumps, a wall of energy drinks, a coffee machine that hissed. She knew the sound of it perfectly even from outside. She would know it in her sleep. She had heard it for 2 years. She went in. The kid behind the counter was 17, maybe 18. A coat too thin for the weather. A backpack under the register in the spot where a backpack is not supposed to be. Tired, careful eyes that tracked the door when it opened, and then did a quick assessment of the threat level, and then relaxed without fully relaxing, because the kind of tired and careful this kid carried did not fully relax. It just had gradations. Wren knew every part of this. She set the cider jar on the counter. "Is there a camp pad back there?" she said. "Behind the cardboard." The kid went completely still. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "I know." She said it before he could build any more of the sentence. "I used to sleep back there too." Third shelf, behind the receipt paper. He looked at the jar, then at her. "I run an orchard," she said. "About 30 minutes out. We have a program, room and board and paid work and people who will notice if you don't come down for breakfast." She took out her card, set it on the counter next to the jar. "No catch," she said. "You'd work for it, but you'd have a bed with heat and 3 meals and someone teaching you things that matter." He looked at the card. "Why?" he said. "You don't know me." She thought about a leather wallet, about $900 in folded bills, about a round security mirror and a buzzing light in a decision made so fast it barely felt like a decision at all. "Because somebody stopped for me once," she said, "when I had nothing. Turned out he'd been looking for me his whole life. Neither of us knew it." She tapped the card. "That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes the person you stop to help in the cold is the very one who has been out looking for you the whole time. You just have to be the kind of person who stops." She picked up the empty cup from the counter and poured herself coffee from the machine that hissed like it had opinions. It was bad coffee. She drank it anyway. "Morning shift starts at 7, she said. "Come hungry." His name was Colt. She found that out 3 mornings later when he showed up at 7 exactly in a better coat that she suspected he had found at a thrift store with whatever money he had, because some people have the pride of not arriving empty-handed. He was hungry. He was good with his hands. He learned fast. By the end of December, he was sleeping in the room above the kitchen and working the press and eating like someone was about to take the plate. And some nights she would catch him at it, and she would say, "Slow down," and he would look up, startled, and she would say, "There's more on the stove. There is always going to be more on the stove now. You hear me?" And he would nod and go back to eating, but a little slower. It took a while. She knew exactly how long. In the spring, she drove to the county where her mother was buried. A flat marker, the kind the state provides, just the name and the dates. She had visited once at 12 in a borrowed coat, standing in the rain because nobody had thought to give her an umbrella. This time she brought something. A cutting from the oldest tree on the north plot, the gnarled one, the one that looked like it had survived everything and had opinions about all of it, and still Silas had said, with private satisfaction, gave the sweetest apples on the place. She planted it at the foot of the grave with her own hands. The soil was cold still, not frozen, just cold. She worked it with a hand shovel she had brought from the barn. She set the cutting in the hole. She packed the soil around it. She sat back on her heels. She looked at the name on the flat marker. "I found it," she said, "to the turned earth, to the frequency that daughters use when they are speaking to mothers who cannot answer. I found the way home. I'm sorry it took me so long." She stayed for a while. Then she drove back. The orchard was waiting. The blossoms were 2 weeks out. Colt was learning to prune. Everett was on the phone with a restaurant in the next county about the fall order. And the porch light was on. As she came up the long driveway in the late afternoon, the light was already on because she had left it on that morning and left it on the morning before that. And she intended to leave it on every morning from now until there was no more morning left to have an intention about. For the kids, that was what Silas had said. Leave it on for the kids. She turned off the engine. She sat in the car for a moment and looked at the farmhouse and the barn and the orchard and the light. And she thought about a man she had never met who had set out 40 acres of apple trees by hand, and how a tree is a statement about the future. You plant it not for now, but for later. You plant it as a form of faith that later is going to exist and be worth the planting. She thought about a girl who had grown up running between those rows and left, and spent her whole life being homesick for a word she could not say out loud. She thought about a wallet on a counter and a decision made under bad light. And she thought about a tin of spearmint mints and $14. Which was not nothing. Which was it turned out exactly enough. She got out of the car. She went inside. On the kitchen wall, two halves of an old photograph hung side by side in one frame. A little girl and a dog and a man with a face. The same broken board running clean across both of them. The same April light. The same patient dog. The same small hand buried in the fur. Complete. After 26 years. Complete. And under the frame, on a small piece of paper in Wren's handwriting, the single word her mother had written on the back of the photograph in the years after she left. The word she had meant all along, not a place, a person, a choice, a thing you build one Tuesday at a time, home.